Welcome to a new Draw My Life video. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, better known as the Milwaukee Monster, was a serial killer that killed 17 men between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, state of Wisconsin, US. His father, Lionel Dahmer, and his mother, Joyce Flint, were caring parents that gave him a happy childhood. This was why, years later, lots of people wondered how come a boy from a normal family became an authentic monster. Dahmer's killer instincts were soon revealed. When he was 10, Dahmer started hunting and torturing small animals, cleaning their bones and collecting them in formal battles. However, at school, he was able to hide his darkest instincts and passed unnoticed as a normal boy, joking around with his classmates. When he was around adults, he was an educated, calm boy with great social abilities, so they never suspected of his mischief. When Dahmer turned into a teenager, the idyllic home created by his parents started to fall apart. They got a divorce, and soon after, his father married again and left home. Dahmer's mom got sick and started being more and more absent. Dahmer started having recurring thoughts and started to fantasize about killing human beings. He knew those thoughts were evil, but since he couldn't silence them, he started drinking alcohol. He became a lonely and shy young man who barely talked to any of his classmates. With his father in a different state and his mother absent, Dahmer found the opportunity to make his fantasies real. A few weeks after graduating, when he was 18, Dahmer went for a ride in his car. He found a hitchhiker, Steve Hicks, and offered to give him a ride. He took him home and once there, hit him in the head with a weight bar and choked him. Dahmer got scared. He took the corpse to his basement and thought about how he'd get rid of it. The next day, with a hunter's knife, he opened his guts and cut the body in pieces. He put them inside trash bags, placed them in the back of his car and decided to take them to a dumping site. It was 3 in the morning and Dahmer was driving on a desert road. Suddenly, he went by 2 policemen. They stopped him and tested his blood alcohol level. One of the officers lighted the back of the car and asked him what was inside the bags. "It's trash," he answered. "There are no dumping sites near my place. They stink, and since I couldn't sleep, I wanted to get rid of them." The policeman noticed the bad smell coming from the bags and so believed Dahmer and let him go. He had been very close to being discovered. He drove back home and the following morning put the bags inside a waste pipe. His modus operandi kept improving until he reached a very practical pattern. He chose his victim, invited him home, then choked him and quartered the body. He also started taking pictures of the corpses and practicing cannibalism, drinking his victim's blood and eating the rest of his slaughters. Since nobody suspected of him, Dahmer became overconfident and started killing more frequently, until, in 1989, he had his first encounter with justice. He was sentenced to a year in prison. After that year, he rented a place in Milwaukee, planning on killing again. But in July 1991, one of his victims escaped from Dahmer's apartment and went to the police. When the policemen entered there, they found a really grotesque scene. More than 100 pictures of bodies and different phases of dismemberment. In the kitchen, they found several heads inside the fridge next to mummified organs in metal jars. Dahmer didn't fight the authorities. In fact, he collaborated, confessing and narrating the assassination of a total of 17 men during 13 years. He declared himself guilty but crazy, so he'd been sent to a special jail. However, he was declared conscious of his actions, so he went to a normal prison. He was sentenced to 15 life sentences at the Columbia Correctional Institute. 3 years after his entry, he was involved in a fight. He ended up dead after being hit on his head with a weight bar. The same object Dahmer had used in his first murder. Ironic, huh? Today we'll travel through history to tell you about a dark and bloodthirsty character, the Countess Elizabeth Bathory. She was born in Hungary in 1560 in the middle of one of the most ancient and powerful families of the country, thus her title of Countess. Among her relatives were important personalities such as princes and cardinals. as well as eccentric relatives such as a Satan-worshipping uncle and a cruel and alcoholic older brother. She was a smart girl, educated in politics, science, and arts. She showed interest in astronomy and alchemy, and also mastered 4 languages. She was also beautiful and delicate, but suffered from fits of rage since she was little. Some believe they were due to epilepsy. She was just 11 years old when she got engaged with Ferenc Nadasti, a 26-year-old man who was also part of the aristocracy. A year later, after her engagement, she moved to Kastij, her future husband's castle. Her life was relatively normal until she turned 13 years old and became pregnant from one of the servants. This resulted in her being imprisoned in a remote fortress where she gave birth to her son, who was soon taken from her and sent out of the country. 2 years later, she got married with her fiancé, who is known as the Black Knight. He would spend long seasons in the battlefield, and Elizabeth felt pretty lonely. So much so that she became interested in the world of esotericism, surrounding herself with shamans, sorcerers, and alchemists. It was then when she started to practice some torture techniques she learned from her husband, such as introducing needles under the nails of her servants, as well as leaving them in the snow and then throw cold water on them to see them freeze to death. Since she barely saw her husband, it took 10 years for her to have her first daughter, and years later she would give birth to 3 other children. From the letters she wrote, many think Elizabeth was a good mother and wife, something that clashed with all the other details about her that were gradually discovered throughout the years. Her life changed in January 1604 after her husband died. From that point on, her atrocities were unleashed as if a monster awoke inside of her. The first thing she did was throw her mother-in-law out of the castle, who she hated, along with the rest of her relatives. She then ordered to lock in the basement all the servants loyal to the mother-in-law as punishment. Elizabeth also ordered to cut the mouth of a servant who spoke too much, and ordered to burn other servants alive. She even forced one to sit on a blazing grill, leaving her there for hours. Bathory was now more than 40 years old, and her beauty was starting to decline. Worried, she asked one of her nursemaids for advice, who told Elizabeth about the rejuvenating power of blood and human sacrifices. One day, a maiden accidentally pulled Elizabeth's hair while combing it. And in a fit of rage, she hit the maiden until her blood splashed on the countess. She then believed that the parts of her skin stained with the blood looked more beautiful, so she ordered to cut the veins and neck of the maiden and fill up a bathtub with her blood. From then on, that horrid ritual became a common practice to her. Elizabeth was incapable of continuing with her crimes alone, so she recruited servants and shamans to kidnap her victims, most of them young girls from wealthy families. Over time, her health deteriorated, and one time when she was sent a young maiden to keep her company, Elizabeth jumped over her, biting her shoulder and breast. Soon, rumors started to spread about strange events taking place at the Kastij castle. At one point, the servants were no longer able to hide all the corpses, and so they started to deposit them in a nearby field. And when a few villagers discovered the lifeless bodies of about a dozen young people, the alarm went off. In December 1610, the Count Thurzo, cousin of Elizabeth, entered the castle with his man. As soon as they did, they saw a servant in the courtyard, agonizing and with her bones broken. Once inside, they saw a young woman bled dry in the hall and another one still alive, but with her body filled with holes. In the dungeons, there were about a dozen women with signs of having been tortured, as well as many corpses around them. They caught Elizabeth in the middle of one of her blood rituals. They arrested her and took her to prison, but she was never executed. Some say that her cousin made an agreement with the king so that the name of the family wouldn't be stained, and others believe that the countess used the spells to protect herself. Her accomplices had their fingers tore out using burning pincers, and were then burned alive. Meanwhile, she was condemned to a life sentence at the Essay Castle in a dark cell with a single slit through which the guards gave her food and water. She died 4 years later in 1614 and was buried in the family pantheon. After her death, it was forbidden to talk about her in the entire country, and for years, the documents of her trial remained hidden. She went down as one of the biggest serial killers in history, with more than 650 victims throughout 10 years. And something especially peculiar is that it seems that a relationship existed between the Bathory family and the Vlad Tepes family, the family of the famous Count Dracula. Curious, isn't it? We didn't want to put an end to this terrifying week without letting you know what your ghostly zodiac sign is. Do you like astrology, TikTakers? And what if we add a bit of horror to it? Today, we'll talk about the dark zodiac, which we discovered by watching the movie 13 Ghosts. Here, the zodiac signs become a terrifying version of the originals, since each one belongs to a particular ghost. So pay attention and look for your sign to see who died in the same period that you were born in. Let's start with Aries. Entrepreneurial, restless, sincere, and fair. However, when their negative side takes hold, they can become a cruel and violent egoist. Its ghost is the firstborn son, Billy Michaels, a child who was obsessed with cowboys and Indian movies. One day, a neighbor found a bow and some arrows and challenged him to a duel. Billy accepted and ended up dying after his neighbor shot an arrow at him on the back. From then on, Billy whispers, "I want to play. Come play with me. Come." Taurus is trustworthy, but when they get mad, they can start acting with no compassion. They are jealous and proud and also tend to fall into bad habits. And that's how the torso, its ghost, acts. In life, his name was Jimmy Gabino, a gambling addict who lost a very risky bet and ended up dismembered in the sea. Geminis stand out due to their intelligence and sympathy. However, you need to be careful since they can also be very superficial and you can easily fall for the lies. That's how Susan LeGros used to be, who used to manipulate men as she pleased. One of her toy boys, out of a heartbreak, tied her up in a soccer field to strangle her later. She was found buried, and he said, "She broke my heart, so I broke her neck." That's why she's known as the Bound Woman. Cancer also know a lot about love, because they can love to unforeseeable limits. They can also be resentful, capricious, and suffer from inferiority complex. Its ghost receives the name of the withered lover. In life, she was Jean Criticus, a wife and mother dedicated to her family who died after a terrible fire in her house. To Leo, love for people is not what drives them, but love for money. They can even scam their own family so long as they can maintain their lifestyle, just like Royce Clayton, a 17-year-old baseball star. Greed led him to get in a car race where his car overturned, and after many rolls and tumbles, it exploded. The young man died and was given the moniker of the Torn Prince. And then we have the Angry Princess, the ghost associated with Virgo. In life, she was Donna Newman, a very beautiful young woman who was unfortunately overwhelmed with insecurities. She ended up working as an assistant for a plastic surgeon who carried out a lot of operations on her. However, all of them were not enough, so she tried to operate on herself. She ended up disfigured and blind in one eye, which led her to cut her veins shortly after. Virgo is attentive, but also tends to go astray due to obsessions. Now let's talk about Libra, who loves whatever is easy and comfortable and wants a life with no complications. The Pilgrimess is its ghost. It got that name because in life she was Isabel Smith, who walked many kilometers looking for a new home. However, she wasn't accepted at the place she chose. Animals started to die and the local priest accused her of witchcraft. Shortly after, she also fell ill, and so the neighbors locked her up in a barn and set it on fire. Miraculously, she came out alive and with no burns. Thus, the town condemned her to die slowly in the stocks. After many days of being the target of insults, thrown rocks, and spit, she starved to death. Scorpio and Sagittarius come hand in hand and correspond to the Great Child and the Dire Mother, respectively. Margaret Shelburne was a woman who was always bullied due to her height. She was exhibited at the circus, and that's where her son, Harold, was born. One day, she was locked inside a chest as a prank. Harold, desperate, searched for her everywhere, but when he finally found her, it was too late. She had suffocated. Filled with hate, he killed the ones responsible with an axe and sold the mutilated bits to visitors of the circus within snacks. When the owner of the circus found out what happened, he ordered his workers to kill Harold. Scorpios have a lot of self-control, both for good and bad things. They're also pretty passionate, especially when it comes to revenge. On the other hand, Sagittarius are idealists and rebels. So much so that they can become unbearable. They can be hurtful due to their lack of tact and can also fall in bad habits. Capricorns are patient and loyal but can turn bad at any moment. They can also be pessimistic and greedy. Its ghost is the Dahmer, George Mackley, a blacksmith unjustly accused of theft and expelled from his city. He refused to leave and his family was killed. As revenge, he killed the responsible ones with a hammer, and as punishment, he was tied to a tree so people would pound nails on his body. Eventually, crows ended up devouring him. Aquarius are always unsatisfied and may even have no moral compass. Its ghost is the Jackal. In life, he was Ryan Kuhn, who had an insane obsession with women and ended up confined in a mental asylum. He became completely insane and was locked down in the basement with a cage on his head. When the entire asylum caught on fire, everyone except him escaped. Ryan was completely scorched. Pisces struggle with saying no and can be confused and depressive, which leads them to lie a lot. Its corresponding ghost is the Juggernaut. Horace Mahoney was a 2.10-meter giant who grew up with his father. He worked with junk, and when he became an orphan, he started killing people. He would attract drivers towards his store, where he would kill them, usually by squashing them with his own hands. Finally, 50 bullets shot by 5 policemen managed to bring him down. And that's our dark zodiac, TikTakers. What is your sign? And do you feel identified with your corresponding ghost? Let us know in the comments. And today, we'll be talking about Lizzie Borden, who is believed to have murdered her father and stepmother with an axe. Thus, she's known as the Axe Murderess. Lisbeth Andrew Borden was born in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1860, and was the second daughter of Sarah and Andrew Jackson Borden. They were a pretty wealthy family and one of the most important ones in the region. However, when Lizzie was very little, her biological mother passed away. She lived for a while with her father Andrew and her sister Emma. He owned several businesses, but even then, his family lived frugally, and it is believed that he was a very austere man who barely showed any signs of affection. A few years after Andrew's wife passed away, he got married with Abby Durfee Gray, a woman from humble origins who could never earn the love of Andrew's daughters. From the beginning, the little ones never accepted their father's new wife, which resulted in a very uncomfortable environment in their house. Abby tried hard to be liked by the girls, but nothing made them change their mind, and everything got worse when Andrew decided that they would all move to a new home. The new neighborhood would be closer to Andrew's businesses, but the girls didn't like that place at all. They begged him to please have them move somewhere else, but he didn't accept, and that really complicated everything. That wouldn't be the last problem the family would be facing. Over the years, their relationship deteriorated to the point that they barely spent any time together. And the last straw was when Andrew bought a property and legally transferred its ownership to his wife, Abby. This enraged the daughters, who felt denigrated by that gesture. And shortly after, tragedy came. August 4th, 1892 started like a normal day for the Borden family. Emma was spending a few days in a friend's house, and Andrew had to go to the bank to sort out some issues. However, due to a strong stomach pain that he and his wife had been suffering for a few days, he had to go back home earlier. The homemaid was also out of the house, and once she arrived back, she rushed to the living room after hearing Lizzie's screams. The young lady said that a burglar broke into the house and killed her father. His body had many wounds made with a sharp weapon, and his head was completely destroyed, showing part of his cranium. The maid rushed to tell Abby, but when she arrived at the guest room, she witnessed practically the same scene as before. Abby was dead, covered in blood, and with multiple cuts all over her body. Lizzie told the police that she had been in the attic the entire time and had no idea about what happened. The agents then determined that the cuts of the bodies had been made with an axe. The agents then continued investigating the crime, and after inspecting the Borden house, they found 2 axes and noticed how one of them had been thoroughly cleaned recently. Lizzie became the prime suspect, and a few days later, the police issued an order to arrest her. The woman declared herself innocent, but was arrested until her trial 10 months later. There were many pieces of evidence which pointed to her being the culprit. The axe found in the house coincided with the wounds, and the maid talked about Lizzie's bad relationship with her stepmother. Moreover, a neighbor declared to have seen Lizzie burn a blue dress a few days after the crime. And a merchant accused her of wanting to buy poison. But despite all of this, the judge declared her innocent, just because he considered that a Christian woman like her couldn't have possibly committed such a crime. Lizzie and her sister abandoned their family house, bought another one in the downtown area, and lived together until a fight resulted in them going separate ways. Lizzie became Lisbeth and died alone due to pneumonia in 1927. Her sister Emma passed away 9 days later in her own house. The story of Andrew's and Abby's murder became very famous, and nowadays the house where they were murdered became a bed and breakfast which offers horror tours. Moreover, what happened in 1892 has been talked about in newspapers, literature, and audiovisual media. In fact, this event is the inspiration for the series starring Christina Ricci titled The Lizzie Borden Chronicles, and the movie Lizzie with Chloe Sauvignon and Kristen Stewart. Were you familiar with these works, TikTakers? And what are your opinions about horror tourism? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!